G'day, I'm AJ, and welcome to the Humans at Work podcast. This is a podcast that's all about showcasing leaders who are doing great things to make their workplaces more human. Today, I'm going to be interviewing a very special guest, Stephen Hennessey, and Stephen is the Managing Director of Bekaert, which is a really large manufacturing plant and firm that's been in existence for 100 years. I'm sure there's lots we can learn from Stephen around culture and around his journey to becoming a more human leader. Stephen is a speaker at an amazing summit that's being held this year on the 28th of July at the Crown Plaza in the Hunter Valley. For more information, head to the beingmorehuman.com.au website. And you'll see the summit is called Culture is the Strategy Summit. You know, we're being led by a highly changing world. The times are changing. Demands of the market, the strategies, the flexible work that needs to happen, responding to COVID, uncertainty about the future, the recruitment and the war for talent. We have data regulation, things that are happening all around the business landscape. And so what do you need to do to make sure that you're a successful leader, not just in 50 years, but in 100 years as well? Let's dive in and chat to Stephen about what they're doing at Bekaert. Now, Stephen is a leader who works for an amazing company called Bekaert. And Bekaert is here in the Newcastle region, but also beyond that, from what I understand as well. And they are about to celebrate their 100th year in business, which is super incredible in this day and age. And when people talk about sustainability or longevity, that truly is playing the long game to have been here for 100 years. Today, Stephen and I are going to have a bit of a chat about leadership, what it means to him, why culture is important or not, and what we can do as leaders to create a culture where people keep coming to work, where we have a service and a business that is around in 100 years, and any other tips, tricks, or maybe even pitfalls and challenges that Stephen has come across in his career. So welcome to you, Stephen. Nice to have you with us.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me along.
Awesome. So let's begin with you, if that's okay. And we don't need to do a big deep dive personal, but I'd love to just know a little bit of your backstory. How did you get to be a manufacturing manager and a local leader? Where did you start out? Did you start in a trade? What did that look like? Tell us a little brief career synopsis.
Okay, so I was one of the late 80s tradesmen. You know, Dad says, get a trade, son, you'll be fine, which is what I did. Left school at 15 to become an electrical tradesman, and did my trade at the old Pasminco smelter at Bullaroo. After that, I started to work within the engineering team there, and sort of fell into leadership out of necessity for the team that I was in at the time, and sort of found that I had a knack for it. I didn't know why, but at the time, I had a bit of a knack for it, and I had some really, really good mentors as well. That I still look back on those guys and think, wow, those guys really knew how to breed leadership and really mentor people to do better than they ever thought they could be. So I did that until the smelter closed, and then was given a great opportunity in the One Steel business to assist with the installation of some new equipment here at the Rope Works. And so I did that as a contractor for a couple of years and really liked it here. I liked the vibe, I liked the team aspect, and also the way the business did what it did. So I applied for a couple of the jobs that they had on, and was fortunate enough to come in as a process engineer. And I did that for a number of years, and One Steel were really good at investing and developing their leadership. So they put me through a Six Sigma program and many other programs around how to be good, how to be an effective leader. But in hindsight, some of it was it's kind of the big steel kind of leadership, which is very effective and was very effective at the time and still is. But it also has some side effects if you're not aware to them, and some of those can be culture. So I've been through a number of roles since then, to manufacturing and maintenance managers, and opportunity became available to lead the Australian business in 2019, which I jumped at. And that's been the most rewarding of all of the career things that I've done so far.
Wow, thank you. What an amazing story. And also, you've touched on so many different topics. I'm like, oh, I need to talk about that and that and that in regards to leadership. I love that you expressed how you just fell into leadership. And I think that's the reality for so many people, that an opportunity comes up, or you need to manage a project or a team for something, and suddenly you're a leader, even though your trade was in electrical, right? And we're not always taught how to be leaders. So I love that you had some mentors and people showing you the way. When you said I had a bit of a natural knack for it, where do you think that came from? Was it that you're in sports teams? Is it just that you're personable? Where do you think that knack came from, and what was it?
I guess I'm a planner, and I think ahead and that sort of thing. And so I'm quite organised in how I do what I do. At the time, I probably didn't realise that, but people thought they could trust me to execute things and do that sort of thing. So that was kind of the way it happened, I think, just through opportunities, and like things came my way. I don't underestimate the opportunities that people gave me. I also had to work very hard to actually achieve those opportunities when they were given. Why I was good at it, to be honest, I still don't know why. I guess it's that discussion around natural leaders versus taught leaders. Natural leaders they don't know why they're good at what they do, but they have the traits of a proper leader. But you can still teach that, I believe, or you can develop that to be, to a much higher level than people who would just say they're a born leader, sort of thing.
I think, like you were saying, you had some mentors and people who maybe modelled it. You might have got some feedback along the way about what to do better or different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The two guys were both technical, one mechanical, one electrical engineer. Very, very capable people at what they did. And they're always the sort of person that in a crisis, they'd be the ones who took the first step. Because they had that clarity of decision making that was always the right path forward, and it's hard not to notice that about those people when they have it. It's hard not to notice that.
And isn't that true that then they build trust, and kind of that's the bedrock of them building a great team and being a great leader is. People need to trust you, to respect you. And I always say leadership is a bit of a joining together, a meeting of two, of competency and care. That if you're not competent, pretty soon the team kind of goes, the leader doesn't know what they're doing. So you were a planner and you had some structure and things like that. So that was really that competency. But then it's that care factor as well, isn't it? That I care about my people. I'm caring about their safety, their well-being, and that they're growing as future leaders as well. And I think you said a term about, that they were seeding new leaders and kind of growing new leaders. So that's kind of that joined together. Would you agree? It sounds like you've got a bit of that mix going on.
Yeah, it wasn't until I started working with Michelle on LSI that in taking the big leap to leading this business that I sort of come across that. And Michelle was the one that said, how we teach you to be the best version of you that you can be, sort of thing. That was what sort of set that in motion a little bit, because I guess another leader once said to me, if you treat people like people, you'll be surprised they'll behave that way. And that's really stuck with me. And it is, if you treat people with respect and fairly, quite often you can resolve things in a much shorter, less, fire and brimstone type of an arena.
Yeah, and I think I've heard someone say something similar, either from One Steel or BHP, John, and he was very much about treat people as people and adults, and you'll be amazed how they stop playing like children. But a lot of what you're talking about as well is that servant leadership, that in order to be a great leader, you said, sometimes they've got to go first. And that doesn't mean go first and leave others behind, though, is it? And when you're talking about working with Michelle Crawford, my colleague, around the LSI, which is the Lifestyles inventory for people who haven't come across that. It really is about walking with people, but always maybe taking that first brave step and demonstrating trust in others.
Yeah, I guess you need to have a clarity of why you want to be the leader too. That's no good. It's quite often we've found in our business that the technically capable people, they sort of float to the leadership roles. Doesn't mean that the technical capability translates to leadership capability. Quite often the opposite, actually, because then you work dealing with people, humans, and that's and so you need to make sure that those leaders, either you give them the skills and training they need before you promote them, or you make sure that that you help coach them along the way, which is very important.
Absolutely, and there is that research that's been done on IQ and EQ, and that the higher IQ goes over 120. So once people are up in 150, 160, the lower the EQ is, kind of naturally, because it's doing that. And so you're right about people can be born leaders, but also we can teach them. So we can teach EQ to try and level that up so that you can be a competent and caring leader. I want to touch back on a comment you made about the side effects of culture. So you mentioned that in big steel and in kind of those bigger manufacturing industries, that there was some great focus on Six Sigma and continual development and learning and those sorts of things, and maybe system process improvement. But you said there's side effects of culture, and I just want to touch on that. I'm assuming you mean there are some good effects, but also some challenging or withdrawal effects. So do you want to express a little bit about that?
Sure. One of the courses, or it was a program that was run by a leader we had, John Barbagallo, who many people in Newcastle will know. It's called Working Together. And it was a systems leadership program which helped coach leaders to be good leaders and how to be what was important to their teams, but also then help teach the teams what their leaders needed from them as well. So it was a two-sided thing. And one of the main themes of working together is that your leaders set the culture. And whatever leadership you have, whatever their culture is, that's what the business gets. And that culture is perfectly calibrated to deliver the results that you're getting right now, whatever they might be. So if you want to have better results or different results, you need to calibrate your culture to match your expectations.
Amazing.
What we found with, what I found personally, because I didn't come from a steel industry, was the steel industry for me had a bit of a stick that would get brought out from, probably too often. And it was one failure and the stick might come out. Others in the steel industry might disagree with that, but that was the way that I found it. And that was something that when leadership here changed at Bekaert, we acknowledged that our culture wasn't what we wanted it to be.
Right.
So we started with a culture assessment. Again, Michelle helped us with that. And it was interesting, some of the things that came out of that, what we needed to work on. Some of it was unexpected. And so we started to work on those things. Simultaneously, we launched a program for all of our frontline leaders to refresh the working together systems leadership with a company by the name of LKS Quero. And that really, our frontline leaders, because we targeted it and tailored it to their levels of work, it was the single most heavy hitting improvement that we made to our culture was with those frontline leaders and helping them to be better leaders, but also helping them understand how their actions affect the greater business culture.
And you're so spot on that the senior leaders kind of set the tone, and as you're saying, do the calibration of where do we want to go, what's that vision. But the middle managers have such a critical linchpin position, don't they, in translating what comes from above, making sure that's relatable below and bringing that culture back up as well. It's such a formative spot being a middle manager, and it can be a real challenge as well, trying to keep both ends happy.
Sure.
And I think one of the challenges I've seen in cultures, particularly more manufacturing and those kind of cultures as well, and I see it in health and places like that too, is that the middle managers see their team as their team. And so that's when you do start to see lots of little cultures as opposed to a whole organisation culture, and that those middle managers don't see each other, their peers, as their team. They kind of just relate to the smaller team that they're in. So how did you address that at a more global level for all of Bekaert?
We began with our business planning process one year. We had a facilitator who came, and that was one of the objectives that we gave him, was to help us work on that. And he put forward the concept of what high performance teams are, how high performance teams relate to each other, and they're like what you're saying there, is where the teams across have high performing relationships, but also downwards and acrosswards, and that's very important. That if otherwise you're not aligned in what you're there for as far as the outcomes of the business. You know, the outcomes of the team are important, but if they're at the cost of the business outcomes, then you probably missed the point somewhere.
Now, I guess some people would be surprised to hear that a company in an industry like yours has so much focus on high performance and culture. I think, you know, in the past, we've heard lots more around just bottom line. How do we make profits for shareholders? What can we do to make things, you know, I guess more profitable? But for a company that's been around 100 years, the work that you've put into culture, how do you think that came around? Where was the realization? Has that been just something you introduced? Has that been something around for a while? You know, what is it that makes a culture like yours? Because I'm sure that's not the norm in the industry.
I guess when the change of leadership happened here in our business, it was because Bekaert wanted to have a different culture. And one of the things that I sort of set a personal challenge for on that day was that, if I could look back and say that I've made a really positive change to the culture in this business, that would be a really cool career goal to have achieved. And I wish I could say that we had the foresight to have planned our culture journey from the outset, but we didn't. We started, and in small steps we went forward, and some of those were shop floor, some of those were top leader, but we had a plan, and we attacked them all, sometimes separately, sometimes together. And looking back, it was a pretty good plan. But I wish I could say that we had planned that from the start, because we learnt as we went and developed our next step as the last one was concluding.
But, you know, course correction, as they say, is better than perfection. And that might be sometimes some of the secrets to success. I know I often talk with leaders about making 10-degree shifts and going, what is maybe the smallest shift we can make in a culture, in our leadership, or the way a team interacts, that's going to give us the biggest bang for buck? Because you do see lots of organisations, oh, we're going to do this massive change, and, you know, they have their town hall meeting, everyone gets a mug, and then everything goes back to normal. So I actually think you had a vision, you know, of changing the culture, but the tweaking and changing and adapting, would you say that's perhaps what made it more sustainable, made it more rigorous, and made it work in the long term?
You certainly need to have some thoughts around what's your next big thing to keep it alive, so it's not on life support, and preventing it from dying off. And like you said, that there's another big thing, and the guys roll their eyes and go, oh, okay, what's this one, you know? And when it's over, there'll be another one. So you certainly have to, keeping the energy certainly takes a lot of personal discipline.
Yeah. And so a couple of last questions, because I'm thinking about what people listening might be interested in. And one of those would be COVID. And as much as we might like to see it in the rearview mirror now, it's still part of, you know, a change in the way we work. So for a lot of white-collar workers, they're now working from home. You're obviously in a very kind of different industry where you no doubt need your hand there. What's changed or shifted, and how have you maintained culture throughout that process of just COVID and the impacts that's had on the business?
It actually had a couple of positives. I think the working remotely, our business was already reasonably well, being a global business. We were already quite used to using video comms and that sort of thing to communicate with our leaders, but not really each other. But when we had to sort of shut down things, almost overnight, we were able to move our whole white-collar workforce back home. So that was the first, that meant we could pay our bills, we could place purchase orders, we could steer the business completely, without much delay. But the floor fellas, they couldn't do that, so we still had to manage how do we keep the business in control with a significant portion of the leadership team not around. And we did pretty good at that, actually. That was one of the questions that we asked, or what was the answer to one of the questions we asked in our first culture survey. It was around the new look leadership team and what did they think, how did they think they're going to perform? And one of the guys from the shop floor had a really astute answer. He said, well, they haven't been tested yet. They're nice guys, but they haven't been tested yet. And that resonated with me a bit. Thought, wow, that's very observant, because you can't just and say, hey, I'm the leader and off I go, sort of thing. You need the people to believe in you. And I think in hindsight, COVID, we probably justified ourselves there pretty good. We lost through the entire pandemic one manufacturing day in all of the pandemic.
Hey, that's incredible.
Yeah, and that was only because we had so many people test positive at once. The best thing to do was we sent everybody for testing, cleared the deck, and then we were able to come back on Monday with knowing where we stood, and we picked up, and that was the only day we left.
That's incredible.
It was really good. Yeah.
That's 100% a story worth telling. Wow. And a real testament. I mean, that's being tested, isn't it, as an organisation?
Leaving the doors open and being legally able to continue manufacturing, and we're quite important to lots of the businesses in the power or mining industries. To keep manufacturing open was a real challenge, and we relied on support from our local politicians and all sorts of people to make sure that we kept our people safe and well, but also we were able to manage our compliance obligations as well.
Operating, yeah, that's fantastic. And I think what you're sharing here really shows the work on culture, because when the leaders aren't around is what the culture really is. It's how do people behave? How do they show up? What do they do when there's not a leader, being present? So great testament.
They've been traditionally quite separate teams, the whites and blue collars. And that was one of the recommendations from the culture survey that Michelle helped us with, and was, well, we should have one Christmas function. And there was a fair change process required, not from the blue collars, but from the white collars at the time. And it's been probably the single best action that we've taken, was the single Christmas function. This year we had over 150 people of the entire business and partners come to our Christmas function. And if you stood back to try and work out, who was who, you'd never have known.
Right. So they kind of mingled like one big happy family. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's how this business has been successful. They've got a very strong team vibe and a very can-do, customer-focused approach to things.
And I think in today's modern business world, that's actually your competitive advantage, that other people, maybe, it takes a while to set up a big manufacturing plant, but people can copy that. They can buy machinery and all of those sorts of things, but they can't copy your vibe.
Correct.
They can't copy that. So, hats off to you for the focus and what you've done, the investment you've done in your culture.
Oh, thank you.
To kind of finish off, I guess, any lessons or successes, or maybe even challenges that you believe anyone from any kind of business, whether they're in finance or health or transport or something else, what would you share as a leader that you think has been most important to your career?
don't be frightened to ask for help
Mm.
around, whether you need coaching or mentoring or someone to point out or teach you a different way or a different approach to doing things. But also a lot of self-reflection is a big thing.
Mm. Yeah. And I can hear you're being very humble in all of that. But also when you talked about the LSI before, that's very much a blue style, which is what we're moving towards as leaders, hopefully. And self-reflection is such a big part of that. And being genuine in really looking at, did I do that well? Could I have done it better? And being open to that feedback from others, which can sometimes feel very harsh at the time, but is what makes us grow. So amazing. I'm sure your dad was proud of you after throwing you into a trade as a young man to see where you are now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, and your employees and team probably don't realise how lucky they are to have someone like you in a leadership role that has that much care and concern for the culture. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us today, and I wish you all the best with the future and continuing from 100 years on.
Oh, thank you very much.